No one will adopt me because I'm fat. Those were the heartbreaking words of a young black teen, whispered through tears to a millionaire who stopped in his tracks. He wasn't just any man, he carried scars of his own, secrets from a childhood spent in the very same orphanage. And when he looked into her eyes, he saw something the world had refused to see. But what begins as a flicker of hope quickly spirals into a storm of resistance. The system pushes back. Whispers of doubt rise louder. And just when her dream of family feels within reach, tragedy strikes. A powerful bond is tested by prejudice, illness, and impossible odds. Can love and courage rewrite a future everyone said was impossible, or will her tears become her fate forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Rain drummed against the windows of Hope Haven Adoption Agency, creating a steady rhythm that matched the heaviness in Shanice's heart. She sat alone at a worn wooden table in the corner of the common room, her colored pencils scattered across her latest sketch. The sound of other kids laughing and playing echoed through the space, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another world entirely. Her fingers moved across the paper, adding careful strokes to her drawing of a family, something she'd done hundreds of times before. Each line was precise, each shade carefully chosen, as if getting it perfect might somehow make it real. Through the noise, whispers caught her attention. A couple, dressed in expensive clothes, stood near the doorway with one of the social workers. Their eyes darted in her direction, then quickly away. She seems, well, the woman hesitated, her voice dropping even lower, but not low enough. She's too old, too big for what we're looking for. Shanice's hand trembled, smudging the line she'd been drawing. She'd heard words like these before, but they still cut deep, each time feeling like the first. The afternoon dragged on, and the rain kept falling. Then something changed in the common room's atmosphere. The usual chaos shifted as Ethan Wallace, a man in his 60s wearing a simple but clearly expensive suit, stepped through the door. Shanice had heard the staff talking about him, a wealthy donor who helped fund the agency. The other kids recognized him too. They swarmed around him like bees to honey, their voices rising in excitement. Some tugged at his sleeves, while others showed off toys or drawings. Ethan smiled warmly at each child, his eyes crinkling at the corners. As he listened to their stories, Shanice hunched lower over her sketch, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. But something inside her was building, like a pot about to boil over. All the rejected applications, all the whispered comments, all the pitying looks, they crashed together in her chest until she couldn't contain them anymore. No one will adopt me because I'm fat. The words burst from her lips, loud enough to silence the room. Her cheeks burned as everyone turned to stare, but she couldn't take the words back now. They hung in the air, raw and real. Ethan Wallace turned toward her voice. He moved carefully through the crowd of children, making his way to her corner. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her table, bringing himself to her eye level. His face showed no pity, no dismissal, just genuine attention. He looked straight into her eyes, and in that moment, Shanice felt truly seen for the first time in years, not as a problem to be solved or a case to be managed, but as a person. "I see you," he said simply, his voice gentle but firm. Those 3 words carried more weight than all the empty reassurances she'd heard before. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of the dormitory, but Shanice had been awake for hours. She lay still in her narrow bed, wrapped in her faded purple blanket, turning Ethan's words over and over in her mind like precious stones. "I see you." Such simple words, yet they echoed in her thoughts, refusing to fade with the morning light. Her stomach twisted, with a familiar mix of emotions. Hope fluttered like a trapped butterfly, while doubt crept in like a dark shadow. She'd been here before, moments when adults showed kindness, only to disappear like morning mist. 8 years of watching other kids leave with their new families had taught her harsh lessons about getting her hopes up. The breakfast bell rang, its sharp chime cutting through her thoughts. Shanice pulled herself from bed, trying to smooth down her unruly curls before heading to the dining hall. The smell of pancakes filled the air, but her appetite vanished as soon as she stepped through the doorway. "Hey, look who it is," Tommy, one of the older boys, called out. "It's the girl who scared away the rich guy." Laughter rippled through the room like a cruel wave. "I bet he won't come back now," Lisa chimed in, flipping her blonde ponytail. "Way to go, drama queen." Shanice grabbed a tray, her hands shaking slightly as she loaded it with food she knew she wouldn't eat. She found her usual spot at the end of the long table, away from the others. The pancakes turned to cardboard in her mouth as she forced herself to take small bites. But that afternoon, something unexpected happened. Miss Jenkins, the social worker, appeared in the doorway of the art room, where Shanice was hiding out with her sketchbook. "Shanice, someone's here to see you." Her heart stumbled in her chest when she saw Ethan Wallace standing in the visiting room, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. He wore a simple blue sweater that somehow made him look both important and approachable. "Hello, Shanice," he said warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I couldn't stop thinking about that sketch I saw yesterday." Shanice clutched her sketchbook tighter to her chest, but Ethan pulled up a chair and sat down, leaving comfortable space between them. "Would you tell me about what you like to draw?" Slowly, carefully, Shanice opened her sketchbook. Page by page, she showed him her drawings. The birds that visited the agency's garden, the way the city looked at sunset from the roof, portraits of the younger kids playing. Ethan asked questions, real questions, not the kind adults usually ask just to be polite. He noticed details, pointed out things even she hadn't realized she'd captured. Time slipped away as they talked. Ethan listened as she described her dream of becoming an artist, of painting huge murals that would make people stop and smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell her to be more realistic. He just nodded and asked what colors she'd use. That night, tucked under her purple blanket, Shanice hugged her sketchbook to her chest. The usual ache of loneliness felt different, somehow, lighter. In the darkness, she whispered words so quiet they were barely a breath. "Maybe I am worth something." For the first time in years, she fell asleep with a smile on her face, her dreams filled with colors and possibilities instead of shadows. The morning sun cast gentle shadows across the agency's garden. As Ethan and Shanice stepped outside together, the agency director followed a few paces behind, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes sharp and watchful. The garden wasn't much, just a small patch of green with a few weather-worn benches and some struggling rose bushes, but today it felt different to Shanice. "The roses need some care," Ethan remarked, stopping to touch a drooping bloom. "Sometimes the most beautiful things just need a little attention to shine." Shanice walked beside him, her steps careful and measured. She noticed how he matched her pace, never rushing ahead, like most adults did. The director's shoes clicked against the concrete path behind them, a constant reminder of her presence. "You know," Ethan said, settling onto one of the wooden benches, "I used to sit right here, many years ago." He patted the space next to him, inviting Shanice to sit. Her eyes widened. "You lived here?" "I did." Ethan's voice grew soft, his eyes distant. "Right here in this very building, 45 years ago. My parents left me when I was 8 years old. Never knew why. They just dropped me off one day and never came back." Shanice's hands twisted in her lap. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This successful man, with his nice suit and kind eyes, had once been just like her. "I remember feeling so invisible," he continued, "like I wasn't worth keeping. The other kids got adopted, one by one, but nobody wanted the quiet boy who spent all his time reading." The director shifted uncomfortably behind them, but Ethan kept speaking, his voice steady and clear. "I promised myself I'd work hard, make something of myself. Started my first business when I was 22 years old. Built it up, piece by piece. But you know what? He turned to face Shanice directly. All the money in the world doesn't fill that empty space inside when you feel unwanted. Shanice nodded, her throat tight with understanding. She knew that empty space all too well. But being unwanted doesn't mean we're not worthy, Ethan said firmly. Sometimes, life just takes a different path than we expect. Their time together passed too quickly, and soon the director was clearing her throat, signaling the end of their visit. As Ethan stood to leave, Shanice watched him walk toward the building's entrance. Her heart felt fuller than it had in years, warm with the knowledge that someone truly understood her pain, her fears, her hopes. He understands me, she whispered to herself, the words carrying a weight of revelation that made her eyes sting with tears. Shanice's heart skipped a beat as she paused outside the staff office door. Inside, voices carried through the thin walls, discussing her future. Mr. Wallace has been asking about her background, the agency director said. He's shown more interest in the past week than any potential parent has in years. A harsh laugh cut through the air. Come on, the cruel staff member scoffed. A wealthy businessman like him. This has publicity stunt written all over it. Rich man saves troubled teen. Perfect for the newspapers. Shanice's fingers curled into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but now she couldn't move. Besides, the cruel voice continued, he's in his 60s. How's he going to handle a teenager, especially one with her challenges? Down the hallway, a group of foster kids huddled together, pointing and whispering. Did you hear? One girl said loudly enough for Shanice to hear. He's just feeling sorry for her. No way he'll actually pick her. Shanice hurried past them, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She found herself in the common room, where Ethan was waiting. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners when he saw her. There you are, he said warmly. I've been thinking about something important. He patted the seat beside him on the worn sofa. I want to discuss the possibility of adoption. The world seemed to stop. Shanice's breath caught in her throat. Me? She whispered. Yes, you. Ethan's voice was firm. I know there will be challenges. The agency has concerns. He sighed heavily. They think I'm too old. They worry about my motives because of my wealth. And they've mentioned your. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your physical health. Shanice's heart sank. Of course. Her weight. Always her weight. But, Ethan continued, I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age. Determination. Creativity. A heart that's been hurt but keeps hoping. Before Shanice could respond, the agency director appeared in the doorway. Mr. Wallace, we need to discuss some paperwork. Her tone was clipped, professional. There are several factors to consider. Shanice watched Ethan follow the director out, his shoulders straight but tension visible in his stride. The whispers from the hallway echoed in her mind. She slipped away to the second-floor bathroom, the one nobody used because the light flickered. Standing before the spotted mirror, Shanice stared at her reflection. Her dark skin seemed dull under the harsh fluorescent light, her round face blurred by tears she refused to let fall. Don't get your hopes up, she whispered to her reflection, the words barely audible over the hum of the faulty light. Don't get your hopes up. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual dinner chaos as children lined up with their plastic trays. Shanice stood at the very back of the line, her stomach growling. She watched as plate after plate of macaroni and cheese was served, until finally, she was the only one left. Here you go, the server said, scraping the last bits from the bottom of the pan. The portion was noticeably smaller than what the others had received. As Shanice turned to find a seat, she caught fragments of conversation between two staff members near the kitchen door. The cruel staff member's voice carried clearly across the room. It's a waste of time, he muttered. Families don't want damaged kids. They come looking for perfect little angels, not. He gestured vaguely in Shanice's direction. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her hands trembled as she gripped her tray tighter. forcing herself to walk to an empty table in the corner. The macaroni and cheese turned tasteless in her mouth as she tried to hold back tears. Later that afternoon, Shanice noticed unusual activity near the director's office. Through the glass partition, she saw Ethan Wallace sitting across from the agency director, his face serious as he filled out paperwork. Her heart leaped. He was really doing it, starting the adoption process. But the director's voice carried through the partially open door. "Mr. Wallace, I must warn you about the legal complications. Your age is a significant concern, and given Shanice's particular circumstances, the board will need extensive convincing." "What particular circumstances?" Ethan's voice was sharp. Her weight issues suggest poor self-control. Her background, the multiple rejections, they've left emotional scars. The board looks for stable placements. "Mr. Wallace, we can't risk another failed adoption." Shanice backed away from the door, her chest tight. The macaroni and cheese from dinner threatened to come back up. She fled down the hallway, past curious stares from other children, until she reached her small shared bedroom. That night, after lights out, Shanice buried her face in her pillow. The tears she'd held back all day finally broke free. The other girls in the room pretended not to hear her muffled sobs. "Please don't give up on me," she whispered into her pillow, thinking of Ethan's kind eyes and gentle voice. But the director's words echoed in her head. Particular circumstances, poor self-control, emotional scars. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was too damaged, too difficult to love. Her pillow grew damp with tears as she wondered if Ethan would be like all the others, full of good intentions at first, but eventually walking away when things got too complicated. The night stretched long before her as she cried, her hopes for a family once again hanging by a thread. Shanice's hands trembled as she folded her favorite sweater, the soft blue one with tiny hearts that she'd gotten last Christmas. The social worker had told her just yesterday that Ethan had finally gotten permission for weekend visits. Now, standing in her small room at the agency, she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Don't forget your toothbrush," called Miss Martinez, watching from the doorway as Shanice carefully packed her worn duffel bag. "And remember, I'll be checking in regularly by phone." Shanice nodded, her stomach doing flip-flops. She'd never stayed anywhere overnight except the agency and foster homes, and those memories weren't happy ones. But this was different. This was Ethan. The drive to his house was quiet, with Shanice pressing her face against the car window, watching fancy houses grow bigger and bigger. When they pulled up to Ethan's home, her eyes went wide. The mansion stretched across perfectly manicured lawns, with tall windows gleaming in the afternoon sunday. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" Ethan chuckled, noticing her expression. "But wait until you see inside." Shanice followed him through double doors into a foyer with ceilings so high she had to tip her head back to see them. But it was what she spotted in the living room that made her freeze mid-step, a gorgeous black grand piano, its polished surface catching the light from the windows. "Do you play?" she whispered, afraid to even breathe near something so beautiful. Ethan's eyes crinkled warmly. "I do. Would you like to try?" Shanice shook her head quickly, backing away. I don't know how. I might mess it up." "Nonsense," Ethan said gently, guiding her to the bench. "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about feeling." He sat beside her and played a simple melody with one hand. "Here, just follow what I do." With shaking fingers, Shanice pressed the keys, wincing at the clumsy sounds she made. But Ethan didn't laugh or scold. He just nodded encouragingly and showed her again. "That's it," he said as she managed to copy a few notes. "You're a natural." For the first time in forever, Shanice felt something bubble up inside her, pure joy. She played the notes again, and this time they sounded a little better. "We can practice every time you visit," Ethan promised. "I'll teach you properly." Later that night, tucked into the softest bed she'd ever felt, Shanice stared at the moonlight dancing across her guest room ceiling. The sheet smelled like lavender, and somewhere in the house, she could hear the gentle ticking of a clock. Everything felt peaceful, safe, and right. As her eyes grew heavy, Shanice hugged her pillow close. "This feels like home," she whispered into the quiet darkness, letting herself believe, just for this moment, that it might actually come true. The aroma of fresh pancakes drifted up the grand staircase, gently rousing Shanice from her sleep in the guest bedroom. For a moment, she felt confused by the unfamiliar softness of the bed and the warm sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Then she remembered, she was at Ethan's house for the weekend. Mrs. Carter, Ethan's housekeeper, stood at the kitchen stove when Shanice came downstairs. The older woman's silver hair was neatly tied back, and her warm smile made Shanice's chest feel lighter. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Carter said, sliding a plate of golden pancakes across the marble counter. "I hope you like blueberries. These are Mr. Wallace's favorite." Shanice nodded shyly, noticing how the pancakes were arranged in a perfect stack with fresh berries on top. No one had ever made her special breakfast before. "Thank you," she whispered, picking up her fork. Ethan joined them, his newspaper tucked under his arm. "Ah, Mrs. Carter's famous pancakes. You're in for a treat, Shanice." As they ate, Ethan began sharing stories from his own childhood at the orphanage. "You know," he said, pushing his plate aside, "I used to feel exactly like you described, too invisible to matter." Shanice looked up, surprised. It was hard to imagine successful Mr. Wallace ever feeling invisible. The other kids were louder, more outgoing. He continued, "I'd sit in corners reading books, and sometimes whole days would pass without anyone really seeing me." Shanice set down her fork, her throat tight with emotion. "That's how I feel," she admitted quietly. "Like everyone looks right through me. Like I'll be unwanted forever." Ethan reached across the table and gently patted her hand. "Listen to me, Shanice. Your worth isn't measured by how many people notice you. You are valuable simply because you exist." Mrs. Carter busied herself with the dishes, but Shanice could see her nodding in agreement. After breakfast, Ethan led Shanice to the grand piano in the living room. Sunlight sparkled off its polished surface as he lifted the lid. "Here," he said, patting the bench beside him. "Let me show you something simple." His fingers touched the keys, playing a gentle sequence of notes. "This is Heart and Soul. Want to try?" Shanice carefully placed her fingers where Ethan showed her. The first few attempts were clumsy, but he patiently guided her hands. Slowly, the simple melody began to take shape. "That's it," Ethan encouraged. "You're doing great." When she finally got through the whole sequence without a mistake, joy bubbled up inside her. A laugh escaped, loud and free, filling the room with its warmth. For once, Shanice didn't try to make herself smaller or quieter. She just let herself be happy. Mrs. Carter, watching from the doorway, smiled at the sound of Shanice's uninhibited laughter echoing through the house. The school bell rang, signaling the end of another long day. Shanice gathered her books slowly, trying to blend into the crowd of students rushing toward the exits. But as she stepped outside, she saw Ethan's sleek black car waiting at the curb, and her heart sank. She'd forgotten he was picking her up today. "Look who's trying to play rich girl," Jennifer Torres shouted from behind her. "That's probably just her sugar daddy or something." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Shanice's cheeks burned as she clutched her backpack tighter. More voices joined in. "Bet he'll send her back once he realizes what he got stuck with. Who does she think she's fooling?" Ethan, seeing Shanice's distress, stepped out of the car and walked toward her. His presence commanded attention, and the teasing voices faltered. "Ready to go home, Shanice?" he asked, warmly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. His eyes held understanding as he guided her to the car. Once inside, Shanice's tears fell freely. They think you're pretending," she whispered. "Their words come from their own pain. Ethan said softly, "But I have something that might cheer you up. There's a charity gala this weekend, and I'd like you to be my guest of honor." Shanice's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't have anything to wear." "Mrs. Carter's already thought of that," Ethan smiled. "She's been working on something special." At home, Mrs. Carter revealed a beautiful blue dress she'd altered just for Shanice. "Every young lady needs a perfect dress for her first gala," she said, helping Shanice try it on. The fabric flowed elegantly, making Shanice feel like a princess. The night of the gala arrived. Shanice's hands trembled as she and Ethan entered the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and well-dressed people filled the space with quiet chatter. When it was time for speeches, Ethan took the stage. His voice carried clearly through the room. "Tonight, I'd like to introduce you to the bravest young woman I know." He extended his hand toward Shanice. "Would you join me, please?" Shanice's legs felt like jelly as she walked to the stage. The spotlight felt warm on her face as she faced the crowd. "My name is Shanice," she began, her voice barely a whisper. Then she remembered Ethan's words about her strength. Standing straighter, she continued, "For years, I thought being different meant being invisible. But sometimes, all it takes is one person to see you, really see you, to change everything." As she shared her story of loneliness, hope, and finding someone who believed in her, the room grew silent. When she finished, the applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous roar. People stood, clapping, and wiping tears from their eyes. Shanice's heart soared as she looked out at the crowd. For the first time in her life, everyone was looking at her not with judgment or pity, but with admiration. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, heard, and celebrated for exactly who she was. The applause continued to fill the grand ballroom, thunderous and warm. Shanice had never experienced anything like it before. Hundreds of faces smiling at her, truly seeing her. Her heart felt like it might burst with joy. Ethan stood beside her at the podium, beaming with unmistakable pride. He reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "You did wonderfully," he whispered. His eyes crinkled at the corners, filled with emotion. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as guests began approaching the stage to congratulate them. Shanice couldn't stop smiling as person after person told her how moved they were by her story. One elderly woman even wiped away tears as she clasped Shanice's hands in hers. "Such a brave young lady," the woman said. "Your words touched my heart." Ethan kept his hand on Shanice's shoulder, a steady presence, as she navigated this new experience of being the center of positive attention. But then she felt his grip tighten suddenly. "Shanice, Ethan's voice sounded strange, strained. She turned just in time to see his face go pale. His knees buckled. In what felt like slow motion, Ethan crumpled to the stage floor beside her. "Ethan!" Shanice's scream cut through the elegant murmur of the crowd. "Help! Somebody help him!" The ballroom erupted in chaos. People rushed forward as Shanice dropped to her knees beside him. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "Call 911. Someone shouted. Others crowded around, their fancy clothes rustling. "Give him space." A woman in a blue dress pushed through, announcing she was a doctor. She checked his pulse while Shanice gripped Ethan's limp hand, tears streaming down her face. The paramedics arrived in what seemed like both an eternity and mere seconds. They worked quickly, lifting Ethan onto a stretcher. His normally warm skin looked ashen under the bright lights. "Please," Shanice begged as they wheeled him past. "Let me go with him." Mrs. Carter appeared, wrapping an arm around Shanice's shoulders. "Come, dear, we'll follow the ambulance." Now Shanice sat in the sterile hospital hallway, the smell of disinfectant burning her nose. The elegant dress she'd been so proud of earlier was wrinkled, spotted with tears. She clutched Ethan's suit jacket. Someone had handed it to her in the chaos, pressing her face into the familiar fabric that still held his scent. "Please don't leave me too," she whispered into the jacket, her voice breaking. Everyone else left. But not you. Please, not you too. The ICU doors remained closed, nurses bustling in and out without telling her anything. Each time they passed, Shanice's heart jumped, hoping for news, but they just gave her sad smiles and hurried past. She pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders, making herself as small as possible in the hard plastic chair. Please, she whispered again and again, like a prayer, please don't leave me too. The gray morning light filtered weakly through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the sterile hallway where Shanice sat hunched in an uncomfortable plastic chair. Her stomach felt like it was tied in knots as she waited for news about Ethan. The antiseptic smell made her nose wrinkle, and the quiet beeping of machines from nearby rooms only added to her anxiety. Dr. Mitchell emerged from Ethan's room, his face etched with concern. We need to discuss Mr. Wallace's condition, he said softly, gesturing for Shanice to follow him to a small consultation room. Inside, the doctor's words hit like physical blows. Mr. Wallace has been battling a serious heart condition for several years now, he explained, his voice gentle but firm. The collapse at the gala was a severe episode. While we've stabilized him for now, his prognosis is uncertain. Shanice's throat felt tight. But he'll get better, right? She whispered. The doctor's hesitation spoke volumes. We're doing everything we can, but his heart has sustained significant damage over time. Before Shanice could process this devastating news, Mrs. Henderson from the adoption agency appeared at the doorway. Her face was set in hard lines that Shanice knew all too well, the expression adults wore when they were about to deliver bad news. This changes everything, Mrs. Henderson stated flatly. We cannot proceed with the adoption under these circumstances. But he needs me, Shanice protested, her voice cracking. A cruel staff member who had accompanied Mrs. Henderson scoffed. Be realistic, he said sharply. He won't live long enough to raise you. Do you want to go through losing another parent? The words stabbed at Shanice's heart. She watched helplessly as the adults discussed her fate as if she weren't even in the room. They spoke of liability issues, an unstable environment, while her dreams crumbled around her. Hours later, back at the orphanage, Shanice lay rigid in her narrow bed. The familiar sounds of the other children sleeping offered no comfort tonight. The ceiling above her blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. What was the point? The cruel staff member's words echoed in her head. He won't live long enough to raise you. The truth of it felt like a physical weight on her chest, crushing what little hope she had left. She turned to face the wall, pulling her thin blanket tight around her shoulders. The darkness felt absolute, matching the emptiness inside her. Just when she'd started to believe she could have a real family, everything had fallen apart. Shanice stared into the shadows, numb to everything except the dull ache in her chest where hope used to live. Sleep wouldn't come. How could it, when every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan collapsing on that stage? When every quiet moment was filled with the horrible words that had shattered her dreams? No, sleep was impossible now, as she lay there believing that hope, like everything else good in her life, was gone forever. Days had passed since that devastating morning at the hospital. Shanice sat cross-legged on her narrow bed at the agency, staring at the envelope in her hands. Her name was written in Ethan's familiar handwriting, slightly shakier than usual. Her fingers trembled as she carefully opened it. My dearest Shanice, the letter began. Don't let them dim your light. You have a voice, one that speaks truth straight from the heart. The same voice that touched my soul that first day when you spoke up about your pain. Your words can change lives, just as they changed mine. Tears splashed onto the paper as she read on. I know the world hasn't been fair to you, but you taught me more about courage in these few months than I learned in 60 years of life. Don't give up on your dreams, sweetheart. Don't let them convince you that you're not worthy of love. Shanice pressed the letter to her chest, feeling her heart pound against it. The other kids were playing outside, their laughter floating through the window, but she barely heard them. Something was stirring inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite name. She pulled out her sketch pad and a pencil, but instead of drawing, she began to write. The words poured out of her like a river breaking through a dam. She wrote about the whispers she'd overheard throughout the years. Too big, too old, too much trouble. She described the pain of watching younger, smaller children get chosen while she remained behind. I am 13 years old, she wrote, her pencil pressing hard against the paper. I weigh more than other kids my age. My skin is dark, but these things don't make me less worthy of love. They don't make me less capable of giving love. She wrote about Ethan, how he saw past all those things others couldn't get beyond, how he listened when others turned away, how he made her feel valued instead of invisible. There are more kids like me, she continued, her hand cramping but refusing to stop. Kids who get passed over because they don't fit someone's perfect picture. But we're not broken. We're not damaged. We just need someone brave enough to see us. When she finished, Shanice read over her words. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. They were real. She found an envelope in the office supplies drawer and carefully addressed it to the local newspaper. Standing before the agency's mail slot, Shanice held her letter tight. The metal flap felt cold under her fingers as she pulled it open. This is my fight now, she whispered, letting the envelope slip from her grasp. It made a soft, swooshing sound as it fell into the collection box below. The sound echoed in her ears like a promise to herself, to Ethan, and to all the other kids who felt invisible. She might be young, she might be different, but her voice would be heard. The morning sun streamed through the agency's windows as Shani stared at the newspaper in her trembling hands. There, on page 3 of the Metro section, was her letter. The headline read, "Foster Child Speaks Out, a Plea for Understanding." Kids gathered around her, their faces a mix of awe and curiosity. Tommy, a 9-year-old, who usually teased her, pointed at the paper. "That's really your name in the newspaper?" Shanice nodded, still hardly believing it herself. Throughout the day, more children approached her, whispering their own stories. Maria, who had been passed over 12 times, shared how families always chose her younger sister instead. James, 13 like Shanice, admitted he pretended not to care anymore when potential parents visited. By afternoon, the agency buzzed with nervous energy as a local news crew arrived. The director tried to redirect them, but the reporter insisted on speaking with Shanice. Under the bright lights of the camera, Shanice felt her heart racing, but Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "You have a voice." "What made you write the letter?" the reporter asked gently. Shanice looked directly into the camera, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Because we are not broken. We are waiting to be loved. Every kid here has something special to give. If someone would just take the time to look." Other children began speaking up from behind her. The reporter's eyes widened as more stories poured forth, stories of hope, disappointment, and unwavering resilience. Meanwhile, in his hospital room, Ethan Wallace lay propped up against white pillows, his eyes fixed on the small television mounted on the wall. When Shanice appeared on screen, his breath caught. She looked different, stronger, more confident. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he listened to her speak with such clarity and conviction. "Look at you, sweetheart," he whispered to the screen, his voice thick with emotion. "You're showing them all who you really are." As Shanice continued her interview, speaking about the need for change in the adoption system, Ethan reached for a tissue to wipe his eyes. The doctors had told him to avoid excitement, but his heart swelled with pride. The quiet girl who had once hidden behind her sketchbook was now becoming a voice for all the forgotten children. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window as Mrs. Carter held up 2 different outfits against Shanice's trembling frame. The court hearing was in 2 hours, and Shanice's stomach felt tight in knots. "The blue dress, Mrs. Carter decided, smoothing out the fabric. It brings out the strength in your eyes, dear." She began working her seamstress magic, making quick adjustments to ensure a perfect fit. Shanice stared at her reflection, barely recognizing the young woman before her. The dress was simple but elegant, making her feel both grown-up and vulnerable. Mrs. Carter stood behind her, pinning her hair back with careful hands. "I'm scared," Shanice whispered, clutching the note cards where she'd written her speech. "What if the judge doesn't listen?" Mrs. Carter's warm hands settled on her shoulders. "You speak from your heart, child. That's all anyone can ask." At the courthouse, the marble halls echoed with their footsteps. Ethan waited by the courtroom doors, leaning on a cane but standing tall. Despite his recent hospital stay, his eyes sparkled with determination. "Ready, sweetheart?" Inside the courtroom, Shanice's voice quivered as she began speaking. "Your Honor, I know the law sees problems. Mr. Wallace's age, his health, my weight, our different races, but love doesn't see those things." She paused, gathering courage. "In the foster system, I learned to make myself small, to expect rejection, but Mr. Wallace taught me that I deserve to be seen, to be loved." Ethan, sitting behind her, wiped away tears as she continued. "They say he's too old to adopt me, but he's the only person who's ever fought to keep me. His heart may be weak, but it's strong enough to love me completely." The judge listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When Shanice finished, he leaned forward. "Miss, you've given me much to consider. This is not a simple case, but I promise to review everything carefully." He looked between Shanice and Ethan, noting their matching expressions of hope and fear. "I'll need time to make my decision, but I want you both to know I've heard every word." Shanice returned to her seat beside Ethan, who squeezed her hand tightly. They sat together, hearts pounding, as the uncertainty of their future hung in the balance. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation on that crisp morning. Shanice smoothed her dress for the 100th time, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. This time, the courtroom wasn't empty. Every bench was filled with faces she recognized from the newspaper article and television interviews. Foster kids, social workers, and complete strangers who had been touched by her story sat shoulder to shoulder, their presence a silent testament to her courage. Ethan sat beside her in his wheelchair, looking stronger than he had in weeks. His color had improved, and though he still needed oxygen, his eyes sparkled with determination. Mrs. Carter stood behind them, one hand resting protectively on Shanice's shoulder. When the bailiff called, "All rise," Shanice's legs felt like jelly as she stood. The judge entered, his face unreadable as he took his seat and surveyed the packed courtroom. In the matter of the adoption of Shanice by Mr. Ethan Wallace, the judge began, his voice clear and measured. "I have carefully reviewed all testimonies, medical reports, and the unprecedented public response to this case." Shanice held her breath. Ethan reached for her hand. "While there are legitimate concerns about Mr. Wallace's age and health," the judge continued, "I am convinced that the emotional bond between these two individuals transcends conventional considerations. Furthermore, Mr. Wallace has demonstrated exceptional planning for Shanice's future security." The judge leaned forward, his expression softening. "Therefore, under special consideration of all circumstances, I hereby grant Mr. Ethan Wallace's petition to adopt Shanice." The courtroom erupted in gasps and cheers. Shanice's knees buckled as tears streamed down her face. Ethan pulled her into his arms, his own tears falling freely. "You're mine now, forever," he whispered into her hair. "My beautiful, brave daughter." Mrs. Carter enveloped them both in a hug, while supporters in the gallery wiped away tears and applauded. Outside the courthouse steps, camera flashes popped like fireworks. Reporters called out questions, but Shanice barely heard them. She stood tall beside Ethan's wheelchair, holding his hand proudly. For the first time in her life, she didn't try to make herself smaller or hide from the attention. She was exactly where she belonged, seen, loved, and finally home. Warm sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Wallace's living room, casting a golden glow across the grand piano where Shanice sat practicing her scales. Her fingers, once hesitant and unsure, now moved with growing confidence across the ivory keys. The morning light caught the collection of framed photographs on the mantel, moments frozen in time that told their story. The biggest photo, centered proudly, showed their adoption day, with both of them beaming outside the courthouse. Ethan reclined in his favorite leather armchair, his eyes closed in contentment as he listened to his daughter play. Though still dealing with his heart condition, regular medication and rest had brought color back to his cheeks. A gentle smile played across his face with each note Shanice struck. Between measures, Shanice's gaze drifted to her reflection in the polished piano surface. The girl who stared back wasn't the same one who had hidden in corners at the agency. Her shoulders were straight now, her chin held high. The weight that had once seemed like her defining feature was just part of who she was, not a reason to be unloved. Your letter changed lives, you know, Ethan said softly as she finished her practice piece. The adoption agency called yesterday. They said 23 older children have found homes in the past 3 months alone. Families are specifically asking about kids they used to overlook. Shanice's hands stilled on the keys. Really? Really? Ethan leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. Your words gave other families courage to look with their hearts, not just their eyes. And more importantly, you gave other children courage to believe they deserve love too. Turning back to the piano, Shanice began playing a melody she'd been working on secretly, a hopeful tune that rose and fell like a gentle wave. The notes filled the room with warmth and possibility. I'm not invisible anymore, she whispered, her fingers dancing across the keys. Ethan's voice was soft but firm as he replied, You never were, sweetheart, you never were. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.